What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Rewired Soul podcast. And to finish up the week of scientific thinking and healthy conflict, I had the opportunity, the honor to talk with Michael Shermer. All right. So, those of you who don't know who Michael Shermer is, you better ask somebody. All right. Michael Shermer is just one of my favorite authors, thinkers, writers, just all around awesome guy. Funny story. I actually tried reading one of his books like years ago, and I was like, I'm not really a fan. And then I picked up his book, one of his recent books years later, and I became hooked. And he has so many books, and I've just been binging them. So I'm so glad I was able to talk to him. But real quick, like I hope you learn from my experience too. Like there's a lot of books where I tried to read it, I was just at a weird place, wasn't really into it. But then when my curiosity was piqued at some point, I'm like, maybe I'll give that book a try. I've gone back to so many books that I absolutely loved. But anyways, Michael Shermer, he is a skeptic, and he created Skeptic magazine, and now he also writes books, he teaches, and he has so many great books. Like when I really started trying to understand why people believe in weird stuff like the supernatural and conspiracies, everything like that, I started reading Michael Shermer's books. And yeah, he's done so much research around this, and he has a podcast. He's so passionate about this, and he loves talking to other people about these topics as well. So I will link a bunch of his books down below, as well as his social media and his podcast. But you can't read, watch, or listen to Michael Shermer's content without becoming a better thinker. And I think that's one of the primary reasons I started this podcast, talking to authors. And after weeks of bugging Michael on Twitter, he finally got back to me. He's like, all right, let's do this. And in this episode, we decided, we talked about a lot of stuff. I had him for an hour and a half, so there's a little bit longer. But we decided we were going to talk about all the recent news around UFOs. We talked about some conspiracy theories. But this conversation, it takes some turns. We talk about biases and psychology, and we talk about a little bit about addiction and free will and science denial and so many interesting subjects. Like I just re-listened to this as I edited it, and it was such a great conversation. So I really hope all of you enjoy it. And if you do, not only should you check out Michael Shermer's books and everything else he's working on down in the description below, but make sure you are following this podcast, like it, subscribe it, follow it, share it with other people. We're about 2 months in, trying to get it out there because we're always having great conversations with nonfiction authors, great thinkers. And yeah, this is one of my favorite conversations. So I hope you enjoy. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Michael Shermer. All right. So today I am with Michael Shermer. How you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Beautiful. So the first I want to talk a little bit. Like I've read just a ton of your books, and like you really helped me, with my thinking and everything like that. But the first thing I'm kind of curious about, because you've been doing this for years, and just looking at these claims of things like UFOs and the supernatural, and I'm curious what kind of drives you. Like for me personally, I'm coming up on 9 years sober this week, and learning to question my own beliefs and change the way I think and update my beliefs, it pretty much saved my life, right? So now it's something that I try to do on a daily basis. But like for someone like you, what's been keeping you going this year, where you're always looking at all these different topics and subjects?
Oh, well, for me, it's all kind of part of the same program that we envisioned at Skeptic magazine when we started in 1992. That is to say, we want to understand the truth, how we can get at it through the best tools of science and reason and rationality. And Basically, I apply that to everything that I could
Mm-hmm.
think of. No sacred cows, nothing outside of exploring through science and reason, and even moral issues and religious issues and
Mm-hmm.
meaning and purpose issues. I don't draw the line anywhere. Economics, politics, whatever.
Yeah.
Just push the envelope as far as we can, so that we're not just talking past each other, or we're not just voicing our subjective opinions, and we can never get closer to the truth. I do think we can make progress that way, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of my life's mission in that sense.
Yeah. So that's something I kind of wonder about. Like you've written books on, just like how we believe and just the difference, between theists and atheists and all this kind of stuff. So whenever I'm reading these books, I'm always wondering, I'm like, who is the target audience, right? Like, so I pick up one of the books and I'm curious. I'm like, why do people believe in this stuff? Um, but when you're talking about conspiracies, when you're talking about UFOs and QAnon, I don't think you're like, oh, someone from QAnon is going to pick up my book and change their mind. So
Well,
who?
they might. You never know.
Yeah, they could. Yeah, so yeah, I might be completely off. So like, who are you thinking about when you're writing or creating content, whether it's a book or articles or whatever?
Well, general readers is how it's often described in the book business. They make a distinction between trade books and scholarly books, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't make that distinction. To me, they're all books for everybody: scholars, professional scientists, general readers,
Mm-hmm.
person at the airport bookstall. And my model for this is a number of my favorite authors and friends: Stephen Jay Gould, Jared Diamond, Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins. They
Mm-hmm.
write books that are for everybody,
Yeah.
and they're not just trade popular versions of their more technical works. They're the only works there are. And just like The Origin of Species, it's highly readable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the technical version of Darwin's papers. It's the only version there is. Same thing with Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a popularized, shortened synthesis of his technical work. It's the only work there is.
Yeah.
And same thing with Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, and so on. There's lots of books like this. They're generally lumped under trade books or popular books or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really, I mean, if you pick them up, they're full of references.
Mm-hmm.
They're cited by professional scholars and scientists, and as if they were the technical work. So I don't have a name for that yet. I was trying to think of a name for that, actually.
Yeah.
Universal books, or I don't know what they should be called, but that's what I aim at. Is just anybody should be able to pick this up. I'm
Yeah.
just finishing up my next book on conspiracies, and I'm writing it for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
From the QAnon Trump supporter to the social scientist that studies conspiracies, as a living.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love, your books and some of the, other authors and people that you mentioned, because like me, like I just have this natural curiosity. I didn't even graduate college, but like when I'm reading and you guys are talking about whether it's, neuroscience or psychology or whatever, it's broken down for like the average person. So you can read it. And when we're talking about, like you just mentioned, like, you're working on an upcoming book on like conspiracies and stuff like that. Like you've been doing this for so long, and I'm curious, have you ever like, or is there a percentage of how many people have like switched? Have they read one of your pieces or come to one of your talks or read one of your books and they're like, you know what, I thought the earth was flat, but you helped me, like how often does that happen? Because it seems like it's such a hard thing for people to change that belief.
I get letters every day, but they're
Really?
just anecdotes. Everybody gets letters, so it doesn't really mean anything. It's not data. The data we have on to what extent people change their minds, you can come at this different ways. For example, there are correlations between education and higher rates of skepticism about the paranormal, the supernatural, and conspiracies and extraterrestrials, things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
not as much as you might think. In other words, having knowledge of science or scientific facts is not a foolproof prophylactic against supernatural and superstitious beliefs. It does have an effect, but not hugely so. There are some studies of people that teach courses on this, and they give surveys at the beginning of class, at the end of class, and of course there's a pretty big effect there. But then again, the ends are pretty small, and of course the professor's been pounding away on those particular issues the entire semester that they're going to talk, that they're going to survey the students on at the end of the semester. So that's not the same as to what extent do we have an effect on the general public? We mean scientists, skeptics, whatever, people who write books or publish magazines or write op-eds or teach and so forth. Are we changing people's minds? Well, it's really hard to say. The polling data, again, are fairly consistent over the last 50 years or so. When they're asked about questions about the supernatural, the paranormal, superstitious beliefs, conspiracies, things like that, the rates haven't really nudged all that much. So it does make people wonder, to what extent are we naturally just irrational and there's nothing we can do about it? On the other hand, there are debiasing programs. That is, if you teach people about cognitive biases, they get better at spotting them, but mostly in other people. There's a bias. That is, we tend not to see the bias in ourselves, and so you have to teach that. But then there might be a bias, and so and so forth. So there's only so much we could do, and so it's like I'll have work to go for the rest of my career.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So everybody listening, Michael has an awesome podcast, and you just had Daniel Kahneman on there, and I've heard him talk about this. But that leads me to another question that I'm always wondering about is, you've been doing this for so long. You know about the biases, the heuristics, and everything like that. But even Daniel Kahneman says, you're never going to just stop them. So what do you do to stop that bias where you're not just only seeing it other people? What are some tips or tools that you could offer the average person? How do you check in with yourself and know that you're not just playing into motivated reasoning or confirmation bias or all this other stuff?
There are cognitive scientists that disagree with Daniel Kahneman about to what extent we're irrational. Gert Ingerinzer, for example, the German cognitive psychologist, has written several books about this, where he argues that the way Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky present the problems to subjects makes it harder for them to solve the problems and makes it look like they're more irrational than they actually are. So this is called bounded rationality, and evolutionary psychologists like Tooby and Cosmides and Steven Pinker also show that if you present these rationality problems in an ecosystem in which would be similar to what we evolved in, that is, problems involving other people, deception detection, relationships between people rather than symbolic logic symbols and things like that, then people are better at that. So my take on this is that we're not that gullible. We're not that stupid and irrational. It's not that hopeless. That if you present problems in a way that it's easier for people to solve sort of ecologically what their environment is, but several other factors as well. That is, for example, if the belief in question that you're talking about is deeply important to the person in terms of their self-identity. Like if you want to talk about the resurrection of Jesus with a Christian, you're not going to get far because they're not going to give that up as a central core of their being. Whereas maybe they would if it was climate change or vaccines or some other controversy that they didn't have a big invested interest in. But on the other hand, if trying to talk to an anti-vaxxer or a climate denier, again, if this is part of their self-identity, they say, let's say, define themselves as a conservative or a Republican, and in their mind, that means denying vaccines and denying climate change, then they're not likely to give it up, regardless of the facts. The facts are kind of irrelevant because the belief itself stands for something else. It's a proxy for something else. And that if you're talking about this thing over here and they're talking about this other thing over there, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're just talking at cross purposes. So you need to identify with the person what exactly it is that concerns them about, what happened in 9/11 or vaccines or climate change or whatever. and so you can see where they're coming from, and then you can approach the problem by trying to take that off the table. In other words, you don't have to give up your conservatism and your beliefs in free markets and capitalism and so on. We're just talking about parts per million of CO2 gases. That's it. That's all we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And try to take that off the table.
So do you ever run into your own biases, or you look back on like a conversation you had, a week ago, and you're like, oh wait, maybe I was caught up in something like this, or maybe you were agreeing with things that, your colleagues or peers were talking about, or like,
oh yeah, sure. Yes. I pound on conservatives on the right and far left progressives on the left quite a bit on Twitter. And I'd say a good number of them are, I'll throw stuff out that, I don't really know for sure in this particular case, if that's true, but I just have a sense that, that these conservatives go too far, or those woke progressives go too far. And, but on the other hand, that's kind of what Twitter is, right? It's not really a platform of scholarship and, careful, nuanced arguments. Even if you release a 12-part Twitter thread, that's barely just like a couple paragraphs. It's nothing. And it's not even a quarter of an op-ed piece in a newspaper. So, if that's how you're judging somebody, well, that's probably not the best example.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. That's one of the reasons why I love books, because I feel like it's the best way to give somebody a fair chance to fully explain their arguments, their thoughts, and how they went through it. Because Twitter, you get 280 characters or something like that. But like, with one of your books, if you say, hey, I don't believe in the paranormal, here's why, the evidence doesn't add up. Like, if you can't do that in hundreds of pages, that's your fault. You know what I mean? But like on Twitter, it's hard to get the full context of, what somebody's thinking, or even like you said, in a Twitter thread. Right.
Right.
But you were mentioning that kind of identity aspect too, and I was just reading about that from something from Lee McIntyre too, and he was talking about being at a flat earther conference and how it becomes part of that identity. So even when we're talking about like, we're about to dive into all the recent UFO stuff, but especially in the age of social media, can you explain a little bit why that makes it so difficult? Because you have people joining Facebook groups with their fellow flat earthers, or the anti-vax people. You got like a mom group, and I'm never going to vaccinate my kid, or and things like that. So is this like a combination of like personal identity as well as like the tribalism of being with a group? Because if you disconnect from them, then you lose your friends and family and stuff like that. So like, how does that all work out from what you've experienced?
Yeah, so certainly, we're a social primate species, so our fellow group members matter very much to us. Our reputation, especially reputation management, is important in human societies. And so, what other people think about me matters to me, to all of us. And so, again, a particular belief you're concerned about, and if, vaccines or climate change or whatever, evolution, whatnot. It depends, again, not only self-identity of holding that belief, but to what extent does that person's social community also believe it? If everyone in their family is also Christian or climate deniers or whatever, all their friends, colleagues, everybody they go to church with, and so on. Again, it's going to be harder to give it up, much less even consider it rationally. And so you have to take that in consideration. These are multiple factors that go into sustaining beliefs that people hold, slightly different than how they obtain the beliefs in the first place or why they give them up, but related to that. Yeah. So social aspects is important.
Yeah. Do you see that being an issue? Like, because I'm sure you get letters, emails, tweets and stuff where people are, like my friend, my family member, I don't know why they believe in this. And do you think that people are trying to understand conspiracy theorists or people who believe in these things? They don't really get that whole identity aspect of it. Like, does it seem like that's something that not a lot of people really understand?
Yeah, almost nobody understands that. That's why I write. That's why I write about it. That's kind of a new contribution, like the conspiracy theories. The aspects, the deeper aspects of the particular conspiracy theory. What does it represent? It's a proxy for something else that you're not thinking about, that you need to think about if you want to understand why people hold those beliefs and why they won't seemingly give them up. And that would apply to anything.
Yeah, and so. So if I'm understanding, this stuff, it feels like being a little bit more compassionate and understanding that this might have to do with, somebody who's been lonely and they wanted to find a group to fit in with. Maybe they lost, family members or friends, or went through a divorce, and, they just joined this group of whoever it is, right? So there's this need for us to be a little bit more compassionate. But like when I see people like you, or even like Mick West talking about this UFO stuff, how do you keep your cool? Because the last thing you want to do is like attack that person, insult their intelligence. I know you say like you get a little sassy on Twitter, but how do you keep your composure when someone's just saying something completely off the wall that you're like lizard people or whatever it is?
Lizard people. Yeah. Yes, well, in part it's my day job. It's what I do for a living, and if you consider myself an educator, I've been a professor for 30 years, so I'm just used to talking to people and engaging them on subjects about which we might disagree. So I'm just kind of used to that. It's not that I don't get frustrated, of course I do, and sometimes I want to just roll my eyes and make a snarky remark about how they've lost their minds or they're delusional or whatever, and I may be thinking that, but you just have to sort of autocorrect along the lines of, as a strategy, if I open my mouth and say this, is how far is this going to get me with this person?
Yeah.
So I mean, I've written about, like the ways to have, the half dozen or dozen ways to have difficult conversations with people, the kind of the things you got to do, like keep emotion out of it. Don't just standard arguments from philosophy and rationality of, no ad hominem, don't attack the person, no ad Hitlerum, don't equate them with Hitler and the Nazis, and, those kinds of things. Try to restate in your own words what you think they're arguing, so that you're not straw manning them, you're steel manning them, or you're not talking across purposes, that maybe you're countering an argument that they don't actually even make. And unless you restate it, and they say, yes, that's what I'm arguing. Usually they don't say that. Then what's the point of the conversation?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And yeah, so now I want to ask you about specifically with all the news about UFOs and the UAPs and the 60 Minutes episode that's been all over the news. And so here's a conversation. Here's a fun story for you, Michael. The other day I was telling my girlfriend how you just ruined outer space for me by discussing like the probabilities, right? Because space is so huge, and I don't think we grasp that. Like the odds of life being on another planet, which, it could happen, or the odds of another life, some kind of species finding us on this planet, just bumping into Earth and things like that. Like from a probability standpoint, can you kind of explain, like when we're talking UFOs, what are the odds or the kind of logical steps we have to take when thinking about, did an extraterrestrial come into our atmosphere and we recorded it? Like just with the vastness of space.
Right. Yeah. So this is in the context of talking about two separate questions that people often conflate and get confused about. That is, are they out there? That is, are they out there and have they come here? These are really two different questions. And as you know, the SETI scientists, SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. There's a group of them up in the Bay Area, and these are professional scientists, astronomers, cosmologists, and so on. Listening for signals from space of a possible extraterrestrial intelligence. Okay, that's a completely different community of people, and they're trying to answer a different question than the ufologists who think on the second question, have they come here? Their answer is yes, they're here, or they've been here. And so we're just kind of looking for traces of that. And the type of epistemology employed by the two groups is quite different. SETI scientists start with the null hypothesis that we have not made contact. We do not have a confirmation of our hypothesis. We cannot reject the null hypothesis that, whatever we think we're seeing is just random signals or noise in the signal and noise in the system, and there is no signal to be detected yet. So if I could put it that way. So they say, of course, if you talk to SETI scientists personally, they'll say, yeah, of course, I think they're out there, and that's why I'm looking. But I can't say we've made contact. On the other hand, the ufologists, pretty much every one of them you talk to, they're quite certain we have been visited. It is absolutely true. It is a fait accompli. It is done. We know they have been here. Now we're just trying to, gather enough evidence to convince all you skeptics of this truth. And that right there, it tells you a lot of the attitudes that they bring to the table. Like, how do you evaluate this grainy video, this blurry photograph? And if you it's like one of these optical illusions where you can't quite make out what you're looking at, and then you're told what it is you're supposed to be seeing or hearing, and then you see it or hear it quite clearly. We've all experienced that, and well, that's an example of what these grainy videos and blurry photographs represent. It's degraded data that the mind then fills in. So the problem of starting off with the hypothesis that we already know the truth and we're just trying to confirm it, versus we assume we do not know yet, and we're trying to gather enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis that we have not been visited. Okay, that's how we would put it scientifically. And to date, the UFO community, or if you want to call them the UAPers, have not convinced scientists. They just haven't. The evidence is just still pretty crummy. And even though everybody's very excited about the new, so-called new videos, they're not new at all.
Right.
They've been floating around since 2004, and every time they get re-released, there's this breathless press release of like, oh my God, there's these new videos. They're not new, and they're no better. They're copies of copies of copies. And if anything, they're probably degraded even worse, but maybe not. But they were never clear in the first place. And so in the historical context, if you go back to the 50s and 60s and look at the evidence presented then, they're really no better than that. It's just again degraded images. You can't quite make out what you're seeing, and then we got to turn to eyewitness testimony. And then therefore, it was a general, it was a pilot, it was a police captain, it was the fire chief, it was the mayor, it was the governor, it was the president. Jimmy Carter said he saw a UFO. It was Venus. We're pretty sure it was Venus, and so on. So then the authority of the eyewitness seems to make a difference, as if their sensory apparatus and brains is somehow wired differently than yours and mine, and they won't succumb to optical illusions like everybody else's. Well, this is not true, right? So again, on this latest round, I'm happy to be change my mind and say, yeah, okay, I accept, but you're going to have to do better than these videos we've been seeing. They're just really not very good.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because I live in Las Vegas and we have a lot of entertainers and illusionists and magicians, but I saw someone having this debate. I think it was actually with Mick West, who's been doing his rounds talking about this stuff. But they were saying, all the how do you account for all these eyewitness testimonies? I'm like, I've been to magic shows here in Las Vegas, and an entire crowd of people think they see something, So it's weird how people can't see those similarities, how it can happen in this situation, but not in this one. But here's a question that I've been dying to ask somebody, Michael, and I hope you've done some research, or you might be able to give me some answers. Why is it, when it comes to UFOs, that seemingly more intelligent, science-minded, skeptical people will believe that, nope, this is probably aliens? Like I've seen people who are like, no, the paranormal doesn't exist. Oh, that's superstition. But with the UFOs, these people are like, well, what else could it be? It's aliens. Like, have you noticed that, or is that me just seeing things?
No. So I wrote a book called Why People Believe Weird Things. In a later edition, I added a chapter called Why Smart People Believe Weird Things. And the argument is because they're really good at rationalizing beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons. That is to say, a lot of our beliefs are held not for good reasons at all. Like if I accept climate change as an example, I don't really know that much about it. I mean, I try to read the technical papers. It's way out of my field. I don't really know what I'm even reading. And I kind of accept the science because I trust the scientific community, and that the professionals who do this in competition with each other, who would be happy to debunk each other and try to, that by the time I get the filtered final published papers, there's a pretty good chance that they've weeded out the errors and so on. So I can accept it with confidence. And we know from studies on these things that people that accept climate science versus people that don't, they don't really know the science any better. They don't really understand it. And same thing with the people that accept the theory of evolution versus, say, creationists. They don't really understand how the theory of evolution works. The average person does not understand how natural selection works. They tend to think of it in kind of a Lamarckian way. And they have some kind of vague notion of population changes or whatever, but they don't really know how to articulate it. Just in their minds, they're thinking, well, pretty much everybody accepts this, so it's probably true. And I accept science because I'm a science guy. I like science, so yeah, all right, I accept it. And so I think that goes a long ways to understanding just in beliefs in general. Now, as for smart people, seeing these things, the fact that, there's this argument from personal incredulity, that is to say, if I can't explain it, then there must be, a supernatural explanation. And so smart people tend to think of themselves as, less likely to be fooled. But in fact, of course, with your example from magic, that's obviously not the case. And I can't tell you how many, people I've gotten letters from that said, yeah, I'm a skeptic too, but, how do you explain this one thing here?
Yeah.
And, it's usually something they just don't know anything about, but they think they should know. It's like, I remember when the 9/11 truthers stuff first started coming out, like, oh, buildings can't fall at that speed. And I got to thinking, how do you know how fast the buildings are supposed to fall? I have no idea. I've never read it. I've never studied it. I've never even thought about it. What the hell do I know about collapsing buildings? So I watched a bunch of the videos and read about it and went, oh, okay. There's really nothing unusual that we're looking at here in these videos. But the average person, they see some homemade documentary like Loose Change, where the guy breathlessly says, oh, the buildings could not have fallen like this. And look at this diagram here. And the person says, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But they don't know anything about collapsing buildings, right? Same thing about, these videos and UFOs or magic tricks or whatever. And I remember being on a Scientific American cruise, in which I was one of the lecturers. And so it's mostly, pretty sciencey, skeptic oriented people. And so somebody was telling me about, about this spoon bending thing that they'd seen. It wasn't Uri Geller, it was somebody else. And he proceeded to tell me, like, I know these are magic tricks and stuff, but he did it in this way that was not a magic trick. I mean, he really bent it with his mind. And the way he was describing it, I knew what the effect was. So I pulled the spoon off the table, which he didn't notice. And underneath the table, I bent it the way I knew he was going to describe. And then when he was finished, I pulled it up and said, you mean like this? And he's like, oh, crap. I said, yeah, it's just a magic trick. You just don't happen to know that one. And I'll show you how I did it. And he's like, oh, right. So, again, no, but you have to be able to generalize it. I don't know how David Copperfield makes the Statue of Liberty disappear. All I know is he's not actually making it go invisible. Okay. Right. Whatever he's, when Penn and Teller do the double bullet catch, the only thing I know for sure is they're not actually catching fired bullets at, whatever speed, in their teeth. They're not, that we know. But the fact that I can't explain it, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything.
I've been really diving into learning about, just our own delusions and stuff, why we lie to ourselves and all that. And there's a lot of good evolutionary explanations for it. I recently read the book Useful Delusions. And I want to discuss something that you just touched on, like when we're talking about the intelligent people who believe in these UFOs must be aliens and things like that. This idea that no, well, if I can't explain it, then clearly that's the only other explanation, right? But I don't know, I have multiple questions on this. Is how big of a factor is intellectual humility, and going back to what we talked about earlier, don't they see it in other aspects of their lives? Like you might have someone who's very, very intelligent in one area, but they don't know how to fix their car. So when a mechanic fixes it, they can humble themselves and say, I don't know. I don't know how you did that, but you're the expert. I'm not. So I don't get why that doesn't transition. So yeah, I might have asked you too many questions right there, but yeah, why do you think that?
Well, again, it probably depends if the subject is important to the person, and if they're smart, they think, well, or maybe they've read a little bit about it. I don't know. Just think of the ancient alien stuff, which is big fun, really interesting. But just notice on the show, they never have anybody that's like a professional archaeologist who studies that particular structure that they're featuring this week, in which they say, well, we just don't understand how this thing was built, therefore aliens. Mystery, the principle is called mystery, therefore magic. And well, why don't they have an archaeologist that says, well, okay, guys, calm down. Here's what we think happened here. And then, you, the viewer, can go, all right, so I have this hypothesis, it was aliens, or I have this hypothesis over here from the archaeologist that says blah, blah, blah. And so now you can weigh them. But of course, that's not the point of the show. The point of the show, and again, these are not objective, neutral shows that, the History Channel just decided to hire some experts to produce a show to see where it goes. The airtime is purchased by this company that consists of those group of people you see every episode. They own the show. They're paid by the show. Essentially they're actors, although they're true believers too. And so it would be like if I had my own show in which I purchased the airtime and I produced it, and I had only my own guests, and I presented only the side of things that I want to present and never somebody else on the other side. Well, if you knew that, you'd go, well, come on, Shermer, that's not really objective, right? And that's essentially what's going on here with most of these claims. People see, like, back to the UAPs, the New York Times said they're real. Okay, first of all, that word real is doing a lot of work here.
Yeah.
Nobody said, people, when they hear real, they think aliens. Well, no one has said that. Not even the believers. It's all it said is the videos are real. In other words, they're not CGI. They're not fake videos. You can make fake UFO videos. If you Google Shermer, fake UFOs, you'll see. I did a whole episode for a TV series on how to fake your own UFOs. It's pretty easy to do. So, but when the government says these are real, that's all they mean is the videos are not faked. The videos are really shot by these Navy pilots and so on. Okay. Yeah. And then back to the New York Times. Okay, well, if you look at the authors, there's 3 authors of that 2017 article that everybody got so excited about. Well, Leslie Kean is one of the authors, and she is a pro-ufologist. She wrote a book about UFOs, and she had been working for years to get an article in the New York Times. She's interviewed online. You can see her talking about how thrilled she was that they finally that took the bait. They said, all right, we'll do something about this. The second of the 3 authors is an author who also doesn't work for the New York Times, neither does Leslie Kean, who wrote a book about John Mack and alien abductions. Okay, again, not a neutral, objective, investigative journalist. And, the third author was somebody that works for the Times that covers Pentagon matters, right? And so when people say the New York Times is now taking this seriously, no, they're not. Because this implies that the bureau chiefs at the New York Times in their august building in New York City sat down and said, you know what, let's look into this thing and be objective and neutral and see what we can come up with. And they did. And look, they came up with this story that the aliens have visited Earth. That is not at all what happened. And then 60 Minutes basically, I'm so disappointed in them because I've been watching 60 Minutes since I was in college. And, I've all long admired them. And they did it, they had no skeptics on there. They had nobody that said, okay, here's what we might be looking at. Somebody like a Mick West. Okay. Mick West is a really smart guy, but he doesn't work for the Pentagon. He's not a Navy pilot guy. He doesn't produce these professional videos and video analysis for the Pentagon. Why is it we lean on him? Where's the Pentagon experts? I mean, if Mick can figure these things out, surely there are people in U.S. intelligence agencies and military agencies that could do that. Why didn't 60 Minutes say, hey, look, this is really getting out of hand here.
Yeah.
Let's find somebody to bring us back to Earth. What are we looking at in this grainy video, this blurry photograph? And then the expert goes, okay, it could be aliens, could be super advanced Russian technology, but more likely it's, and then you present, and Mick is able to do this in like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. He doesn't have to go 3 hours, right? So there's no excuse to not do that. And all his stuff is featured on YouTube, right on his webpage, and it's all over the place. So there's no excuse for anybody to say, I just can't imagine what else it could be. Well, your imagination isn't working very well. You should just look a little bit more.
Yeah. So to go, yeah. So as you're talking about that, I know you've written plenty about this, but how do we, the average person, know when we're dealing with like a false equivalence, right? Like if a news person came up to me and they're like, hey, Chris, do you believe, that aliens have abducted, the president, and that's, now somebody else, and they're, whatever. And I said, yeah. And then they put me next to you. Our outlooks are completely different. So how do people watching 60 Minutes, let's say they did bring on you or Mick West or any other skeptic on there, how do they decipher and say, okay, well, whose opinion's more valid, rather than, oh, well, I guess we agree to disagree. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, so there you're getting at a larger question of media trust, and in the world of online media sources, that's harder to say. But you would think that so-called mainstream media sources like the New York Times, 60 Minutes, we trust them because they usually do have considerable fact checking and the resources to look into these things. I mean, last year I was getting letters from people, emails from people saying you should look into the election. The rigged election. I said, I have no resources to do this. The Justice Department is doing this, and 60 Minutes is doing it. New York Times is doing it. I mean, they have, hundreds of millions of dollars they could spend on staffing and resources to check these things. So we do kind of rely on sources like that, which is why it's disappointing that, they've gone down that path with the UAP business. But let's go back to your opening question at the start of this conversation. So we have 3 hypotheses on the table for what we're looking at in these UAPs. So one is just called the Mick West interpretation, right? They're video artifacts or, illusions, or, there's not one explanation. There's multiple videos, so there's multiple explanations. So let's not go down to, oh, you're just saying they're all balloons. Nope, that's not what I'm saying. They're all just camera distortions. Nope, that's not what I'm saying. Just call that, just lump that, just sort of prosaic, natural explanations for the videos. Then the second one, they're aliens, or the third one, that they're super advanced Russian or Chinese assets. Okay, because the government has already said whatever we're filming, they're not ours. Okay, so now the implication is that that somehow, let's take the first hypothesis, they're Chinese or Russian assets. Is it really possible that a foreign government and their military and intelligence agencies have somehow managed to skip ahead decades or centuries of technological innovation and scientific discovery, which, by the accounts that we're told, that these things can travel tens of thousands of miles an hour and then stop on a dime and turn left.
Yeah.
Okay. And without G-forces squashing the pilots, or, ripping the aircraft apart, or, no sonic boom. They could go faster than the speed of sound by many, many orders of magnitude, and still there's no sonic boom. This is impossible by the physics. We understand. Well, they have a special physics. Okay. How did the Chinese or Russians or whoever manage to do this without us knowing about it? Right? We spy on them. They spy on us. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And this includes so the examples I use are, the Manhattan Project, the most secret project in U.S. history, to create the atom bomb. The Russians had it in 4 years, the time it took us to build it. Right? How did they get it? They stole it. They had a spy named Klaus Fuchs, a German atomic scientist, that they convinced to steal the plans, and he did. Okay, this happens all the time in history. Nobody gets very far ahead of anybody else. Think of Apple and Google and these tech companies and the extensive security that they have. Every employee has a key. Every door is locked. All the intellectual property stuff are just layers and layers and layers of secrecy and protection. And anybody that tries to rip them off, they just sue the crap out of them. They are in court. They have teams of lawyers. They have whole floors in their buildings, nothing but lawyers that sue other people that try to rip them off, right? And still, every smartphone, every computer, they're all pretty much the same. They're all within a few months of each other in terms of development, right? How does that happen? They steal it. They rip us up. They rip each other off. They copy each other. They back engineer. Somebody, it takes a laptop and takes it apart. Say, okay, let's see what they're doing. Hey, and then the boss says, hey, why aren't we doing that? Get to work on that, Bob, right away. Okay.
Yeah.
And, and so forth. So, in the history of science and technology, there are no inventions or discoveries that are made just completely out of the blue, where nobody had any idea. The telephone, the telegraph, the computer, you can see a long trail where everybody, and that's why pretty much every major invention has multiple inventors competing for credit. And they race to the patent office to get their patent in there first, because they know that a bunch of other people know what they know, and they're close to putting it together, right? And this is true for rockets and planes. And so the analogy I make, it would be like if, let's say these UAPs are Russian or Chinese assets decades or centuries ahead of us. It would be like we have biplanes and they have stealth bombers and F-18 fighter planes, or that, we have rotary dial-up phones and they have smartphones, or, that it's just, it's not possible. Or that we have V2 rockets that we stole from the Nazis, and they have SpaceX technology for going to Mars. It's like, that's just not how it works, right?
And I can't remember if it was in one of your books or another one, but even going back, when we're talking about you mentioned ancient aliens earlier, and there's those arguments. Well, how are there pyramids over in Egypt, but they're a similar shape over in Mexico? And it's like, okay, well, even though they never had any contact with each other, they got similar ideas, right? But now today, information just gets out there, right? There's leaks, there's constant, like it's hard. Like, I think if anybody could do it, like Marvel, the way they keep their stuff secret, but other than that, like, things are constantly being leaked and put out there. But why do you think it's so difficult? Like, when we're talking about, the possibility that these UAPs that people are seeing are either A, aliens, or B, this technology, why do you think it's so difficult for people to sit back and just start asking those questions and question it? You know what I mean? Like you're mentioning, like, how can they leapfrog us so bad?
Well, first of all, because it's far more exciting, sexy, cool, fun, interesting, that it's one of those two rather than, it's a prosaic video artifact or whatever. I didn't give my third hypothesis analysis, that is, they're aliens. Okay, so the chances of extraterrestrials contacting us or making contact with us, or we finding them, is very, very, very slim. Every scientist that studies the problem will tell you, the chances of us making contact are pretty low. Now, SETI scientists are optimistic simply because of the law of large numbers. There's so many stars and galaxies that once you do the math, it's pretty simple math, 100 billion to a trillion galaxies, every one of which has a couple 100 billion stars, and it looks like every star has planets, say maybe a dozen or so, and so even if you start doing the cutting pretty dramatically, like it's only 1% have this and 1% have that, the numbers are so huge, you're going to get an Earth-like planet that's at the habitable zone around its sun-like star, pretty much millions in every galaxy. So then that gets to the Fermi paradox, which is, where is everybody? If there's so many of them out there, where are they? Well, my answer is because it's mostly empty space. So my analogy is, let's say the sun is, you reduce the sun to the size of an orange in LA here. Where would the nearest star be? It would be an orange in Chicago, right? We're talking 2,000 miles of empty space with the size of an orange. It's just nothing. Right. There's all this, you could look at pictures of Andromeda and read, just on Wikipedia, Andromeda is going to collide with the Milky Way galaxy in a couple billion years. They're going to pass through each other, and it's going to cause these major catastrophic gravitational ripping apart and so on. But the chances of even two stars colliding are pretty much zero.
Yeah.
I mean, again, and the galaxies are just dense. When you look at the pictures, it's just the stars are so blocked in there. It's pretty much just a block of white at the center of the Andromeda galaxy. But even with that, the stars are so far apart that they'll just pass through each other. So just think about that in terms of like the chances of them finding us or us finding them are just so low. Right. So in terms of like signal detection theory, for a SETI scientist to declare a hit, we have a hit, we've made contact. You know, the bar for acceptance amongst their colleagues is going to be set very, very high, right? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And everybody agrees, ufologists, SETI scientists, skeptics, that discovering aliens would be extraordinary, you know, cubed. Yeah. and so how good is the evidence for that? It's not even ordinary. It's poor, piss poor, less than ordinary. Again, grainy videos, blurry photographs. Come on, guys, you're going to have to do better than that.
And this is something that that's great, because I've been dying to ask you this question, because I get you must have sat back and thought about this, because it seems like, you know, believers are constantly moving the goalpost, right? Oh, like if you have an explanation for this video, then they'll say, well, it could be this, and same thing with paranormal and all that. So for you specifically, just staying on this topic, what evidence would it take for you to change your mind? Like, where's your bar set at? Like, would you need an alien body in front of you that's getting dissected, or like?
Well, that would help, but not a fake, you know, CGI fake thing, you know, like the alien autopsy business. You know, again, it's just so poorly done. No, we would need, and not just me. You know, it needs to be a collection. Science is a social process. It's a community of experts that works in a particular area, which is why we trust it. I don't trust any one particular scientist because I know they're human. They're subject to the confirmation bias and motivated reasoning, just like me and everybody else. So it's got to be a community of people. I know there's people checking this guy and checking his facts, and then there's checkers checking the checkers, and so on. And that's what gives me confidence, right? So for this to be true, I would need, you know, even if the Pentagon, you know, issued a statement saying, okay, we've decided, yeah, they're probably real, as in like Chinese assets or whatever. I would need, well, who said that? I mean, it can't just be some generic committee and we're not allowed to know who's on it. You know, what experts have you consulted? Who is this? You know, to show us. We want, in other words, complete transparency of a disclosure. And furthermore, here's the equipment. Right here's a photograph of it, and you know the New York Times can send a reporter in there to look at it, and the AP Wire people can send in their photographer and their experts, and we all get to see it. That's what would do it. You know, I don't need to personally see it, but of course this isn't going to happen. This is not going to happen because, again, it's not alien. So if it's true that we're somehow behind, again, it wouldn't be decades or centuries behind. But let's say that, you know, there's some exaggeration on those speeds and turns, and that it's actually a small little drone. And the Russians have this incredible technology they've been working on in like a Project X, kind of like a Google X project kind of thing. And they've managed to get a few years ahead of us. You really think the U.S. intelligence agencies are going to tell the American public, you know, we fucked up? Yeah, we are so hopelessly behind. You know, it's embarrassing. Unless the only time I could see them doing this would be like if they wanted to increase their budgets, like the missile gap in the 50s. You know, the government, you know, the military going, hey, we are way behind the Russians. We got to Congress. We need you to increase our budgets because look, we're behind and they're a threat, and you know, existential threat to our country. And Congress is like, oh, okay, we better do that.
Well, that's the exact story behind the space race, isn't it? Us getting to the moon. It was us being worried about Russia getting, you know, Sputnik off the ground and everything, and then we just flooded, you know, our scientists with money and said, you need to do this. So, you know, we could only imagine that, or we could assume that it would happen again if we were behind, especially with the military budget that we have in this country, you know. And yeah, I hope you don't mind, but I want to get political for a second and ask you some questions about this when it comes to science denial. if most of us sat back, or maybe it's just through my lens, it seems like the left is more like, we're the science people, right? Like, climate change is real. We're the science people. You guys believe in crazy stuff, and you guys are more religious. There's more religious people on the right. But you recently had Abigail Schreier. I don't know if I'm saying her name right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
recently had her, but she, in her book, right, and it's it's about transgender youth and things like that. She talks about research and studies and science and stuff, but those same people who will talk about the right not believing in science will then deny other science if it doesn't fit with them. I don't know, like, how do we understand that? Like, I have no problem talking about, hey, I'm left leaning, I'm more progressive, but I don't understand how we pick and choose science. You know what I mean?
Yes, well, because it depends on whose ox is being gored.
Yeah.
The left, the so-called left, they're just bad as the right. But again, who are we talking about with the left, the right? These are these categories are too big. They just kind of flatten the discussion. Really, most Republicans and conservatives, they like science just fine, as long as it's not something that hits their hot button, ideological, self-identifying issues like climate change, vaccines, maybe. Just a few. Creationism, if they're fundamentalist Christians. Most Christians, Catholics, for example, and that's half, that's a billion, that's a lot. They fully accept evolution, just not the soul. We get the soul, you get the body. Okay. They've made their peace that way. Most Christians have, right? So, but it's just those few hot button issues. Otherwise, they accept science. They go to doctors and they fly in airplanes and so on. And, liberals, same thing. But again, their hot button issues are like GMOs and nuclear power, and especially in the social sciences, anything that smacks of genetic determinism, anything but a blank slate. Steve Pinker has a whole book about this. It's fabulous, The Blank Slate. If you think this is just a dog whistle, it's not. This is what far left, more progressive liberals believe, and it deeply interferes with their thinking about the science. So just take Abigail Schreier's book. Okay, it's controversial. She's probably conservative, although I didn't ask her because it's not really important.
Yeah.
But basically, the hypothesis she's making is studies show that there's a pretty significant spike in self-identifying trans amongst teenagers, especially girls. And this kind of matches the data collected by Jean Twenge in her book, iGen. And that's been echoed in Jonathan Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, also by Greg Lukianoff. And they start that book showing there's a huge spike in teen depression, suicide, anxiety, suicidal ideation, anxiety, self-cutting, things like that. So the question is why? Why is there this spike? So you can dispute the data if you want, the statistics, the polls, but they're pretty consistent. It's not just one poll. And not just in America, other countries as well, for both of those phenomena, right? And so, but for Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt to talk about that, it's like, oh, that's we just accept it because it's not pushing any hot button ideological moral issues. Trans does, because trans is kind of touching on LGBTQ rights, and that's a sensitive issue for most of us. We want there to be LGBTQ rights, and we see those guys over there on the right as being resistant to that, which historically they have. So that's the difference between those two communities. Now you can go ahead and dispute Abigail's hypothesis. She says it's social media, and she has chapters arguing for that, just like Jean Twenge does in her book iGen. And there are scientists, by the way, that are pushing back against Jean Twenge, saying, no, I don't think it's social media alone. It's these other factors here. Okay, well, that's a normal scientific debate. That's how it's supposed to work, right? You publish your stuff and then you have debates about it. And but everybody's so afraid to touch the trans issue that it's hard to have a community, open conversation about it. So I had her on my podcast. I read the reviews of her book that were critical, And I just went through the argument. Here's what your critics say. How do you respond? And she did. Okay, that's how it should go. And then last week, Science-Based Medicine, a great, wonderful site that I've long trusted and admired. Steve Novella and David Gorski run this. Well, they ran a review of Abigail's book by Harriet Hall, my columnist, Skeptic columnist, Harriet Hall, MD. She writes for them. She writes for for Skeptical Inquirer. She writes for Skeptic magazine. She's widely regarded and trusted as a reliable source on medical claims, especially related to quack medicine and alternative medicine and so on. Well, she wrote a positive review of the book. She said, I have some issues here, some issues there, but overall, I think she's raised a concern we should all be paying attention to. And so after 24 hours, they pulled the review. They got over 1,000 letters. And I noticed this online because people were commenting,
Jeez.
Oh, cancel culture, cancer culture. So, so here's an example when you ask me, does your own ideology destroy? Maybe, I just retweeted that and said, all right, we're going to do something about this. So I emailed Harriet and said, send the review to me. And we published it on skeptic.com the same day. And because to me, no sacred cows, we're not caving into any cancel culture. Well, then Steve and David both, they emailed me personally and said, it wasn't cancel culture. Michael, please don't say that because we do stand up to criticism. We welcome it. That's not what we're about. I said, all right, I know you guys. I take your word for it. So I took down redacted my tweets, kept the review because I still think the reviews should be read. I think the book should be read. But in that, they admitted they had not read the book, and David even said, I tried to read the book and it was so infuriating. I couldn't get past the first couple of pages. I have no intention of ever reading this book. And it's like, hang on for a minute. It's one thing to review a book critically and say, here's my problems with it. It's another to say, I'm critical of the book. And not only did I not read it, I will never read it. Well, this goes against like every principle that every skeptic has ever written about. Right. So now, okay, what's the problem here? The problem is ideology. It's it's touching an issue, and I think not to address them in particular, but just general. People get confused about rights. They think, well, if the science doesn't come out a certain way, then the rights of minority people, for example, are going to be compromised. So, go back to an earlier sensitive issue of race and IQ, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is like, we should not be studying this because if it comes out a certain way, then bigots are going to be reinforced to say, aha, those people of color are not as smart and so on. So we shouldn't even be studying this. Okay. It doesn't matter what the science says about race and IQ. The rights of people of color stand. Same thing with trans. It doesn't matter what the percentage. So one of the debate is what's the baseline rate of trans? The accepted number is 0.01. 1/10 of 1%. Or was it one? No, maybe it was 1%. Yeah, sorry. I've been studying so many different things and numbers going in my head, but I think it was 1%. Whatever it is, 1/10 of 1%, 1%, 10%, 50%, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's one person on the planet who's trans, their rights should be protected, right? So, and the reason we need to decouple those is because if we couple the science to the politics and rights, morals, the science will get corrupted every time. It always does. So you got to separate those out and say, I don't care what the science says. People of color, trans people, LGBTQ, they have rights, universal rights, stand on their own, regardless of the science.
Yeah. And yeah, it's so weird. Something I've been wondering about, and maybe you could help me with this. I almost feel like there's something wrong with me because I can read these books from all different ideologies and different hypotheses and theories and everything like that. And I don't get pissed. I don't get like infuriated. Like I'm half African-American, right? I've grown up with, homosexuals and people in the LGBTQ community and everything. There's many things about me, like I mentioned, I'm a recovering drug addict and I've struggled with mental health issues. But when I sit down and read a book, my emotions are just gone. Like I'm able, and so yeah, like I don't know, is there something wrong with me? I'm like, am I a psychopath for not getting infuriated by reading these books? Like I can understand why some people might get offended and say, oh, don't say that, don't touch that. But in my opinion, and from what I've learned, is like you were just mentioning, the truth is so important regardless of what the science says. And you mentioned, like, different journals pulling down studies because of backlash. And it's like, you would rather not know. Like if I had cancer, I'd rather know, even though it might make me sad. But anyways, like, do you ever question, like, why don't I have insane emotions over this? Like, how, I don't know.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I do get it. I do have insane emotions over things. I just have to, kudos to you to that you have so much self-control. I have to work at that for sure. Now, I should say parenthetically that whatever Abigail Schreier's politics are, again, I don't know for sure. She's probably conservative leaning, or I don't know. But she is not saying there's no such thing as trans. This whole gender dysphoria issue is real, and nobody's denying that. The question on the table is, well, what's the rate, and why is there a spike in the rate? And is there really a spike in the rate? But it looks like there is. So why? And if you say, well, I don't think it's social media because that implies it's a contagion and it's not real. Well, first of all, that's not what that implies, but even if it did, okay, then if it's not social media, then what do you think it is? And I can't get an answer out of anybody that's told me it's that she's wrong. All right, if she's wrong, then what's the right answer, or what's an alternative, right? So again, I mean, there are people on the right that deny homosexuality is a real thing or whatever, or they're into conversion therapy, just pray away the gay, I mean, but let's face it, they're few and far between. I mean, they were bigger in the 90s, and that they essentially got, they got hammered and finally went away, showing that they were wrong. That gays are, they're born that way. It's not a lifestyle choice. Which, by the way, I should note parenthetically that the current trans issue and some of the LGBTQ issues that imply that kind of fluidity to gender. You can be whatever you want. You can change. You can move the pieces around and so on. A lot of gay guys and lesbians too, they're not too happy about this argument because they've spent the last 30 years saying, no, this is not a lifestyle choice. I'm not just willy-nilly deciding to be gay today and tomorrow maybe I'll go straight and you can talk me out of it, or you can pray away the gay. And because in part because it's true, they're just born that way. They didn't decide to be gay, and also politically it hurts them to imply that it's a lifestyle choice. The idea of universal human rights is based on immutable features of our character, our skin color, our gender, our sex, and so on. These are givens. You can't discriminate against people based on those immutable features. So like on the cake baking issue, if a neo-Nazi goes to a Jewish baker and says, I'd like you to make me a cake with a swastika and so on, the Jewish baker should have a right to say, I'm not doing that. And that's different than if it's a gay person that says, I'd like you to make me a gay cake, because the gays are, it's not an ideology. It's not like, oh, I just, accepted this as my lifestyle today. And, like the Nazi does, the person chooses an ideology or a political position, whereas the other is different. So that's the difference, is that immutability. You're born that way.
Yeah, I don't know if you've checked it out yet, but I recently just finished a book from Jamal Green, How Rights Went Wrong, and it says why the subtitle is Why Our Obsession with Rights is Tearing America Apart. And he talked about the story about the cake and everything, and kind of like your example that you just gave, like if you switch perspectives or create different scenarios, run through your own little thought experiments in a lot of different cases, you start to see things a little bit differently. And when you're looking at these debates around science and, from the left or the right, or if it attacks their specific ideology, why do you think it is that people have this tendency to see it so black and white? Like just through the topics that we've discussed, so far, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh yeah, I've read books with this argument, I've read books with that argument, and I don't know where I'm at, and I'm still in between. Why do you think people pick such a hard side? Do you think that goes back to the tribalism, or is it somewhere else? They don't like all the cognitive effort it takes to be in the middle and say, I just don't know, and there's good arguments on both sides, or the science doesn't know
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you're asking a really hard question that, psychologists, cognitive psychologists, social scientists are trying to answer for a long time. We do tend to simplify things into black and white, this kind of this Manichaean good and evil, black and white, up and down. It simplifies things. Most social issues are really complex. Just think of, political systems, economic systems. Most of, it's really hard to understand even something simple like, why do some people live longer than other people, different parts of the globe, so-called blue zones? Well, they eat different, or they have more exercise, or they have more friends, or they eat Mediterranean, or they eat all vegetables, or they eat all meat. It just goes on. And it's like, why can't we answer that question? It seems simple. It's not simple. You have maybe half a dozen to a dozen variables that go into some effect you want to measure, like longevity. It turns out it's not that simple. And then, you can multiply that by an order of magnitude for some social issues. Why does crime go up or down? It's like, whoa, boy, when you start reading that literature, it is amazingly complicated. When I took on gun control issues for this debate, these series of debates I did with John Lott, because we had done a cover story of Skeptic on gun control. And it's like amazing when you start reading the literature. There's 50 different states in the union, and they all have different laws about guns. Different measure levels of gun control and rules and laws and carry and conceal or not, and so on. And so, social scientists crunch those numbers, and it's easy to see how you can get it to come out pretty much any way you want. John Lott's book is titled "More Guns, Less Crime." So he argues in counties and cities and states that have more guns, they have less crime. Well, when you dig into it, it's like, okay, wait a minute. I know I read your chapter, but then I read, 3 critiques on the other side from professional social scientists that say, no, your numbers are wrong here and there. And it's like, oh my gosh. So, in part, it's easier to just say it's all this or it's all that, because it's a lot of work. I mean, just that one issue took me like 6 months of reading to kind of get my mind around it, right, enough that I could speak publicly about it. And even there, I'm not at all confident that my particular position that we need more gun control measures is right. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just gonna say, like all the like you just mentioned, like you did like 6 months. I recently had Stuart Ritchie on, and I'm like, hey man, like I know you enjoy like going through these studies and making sure that nobody was hacking and it was peer reviewed properly and stuff. I'm like, but the average person, like, we don't have time to go through all that. Like, it's easy. It's just, okay, who do I trust? That person, what's your opinion? Okay, cool, tell me. And I guess it's the same with books. People would rather hear other people's opinions on books, right, than sitting down and taking the hours it takes to read and break it down. And it would take even more time just to look at all the studies in there. So we take these shortcuts, and yeah, I personally, I think it just takes some humility. Like I haven't, like you've said it quite a few times. It's like, I haven't looked enough into that, or I'm not the expert in this area. And it's hard for us to do that, it seems.
I'll read to you one of the epigrams from my forthcoming book on conspiracies. This is from Alan Moore, The Mindscape of Alan Moore. It's from a documentary. He's the guy that wrote these books on V is for Vendetta.
Oh, yeah.
He says, the main thing that I learned about conspiracy theories is that conspiracy theorists believe in a conspiracy because that is more comforting. The truth of the world is that it is actually chaotic. The truth is that it's not the Jewish banking conspiracy or the gray aliens or the 12-foot reptiloids from another dimension that's in control. The truth is far more frightening. Nobody is in control. The world is rudderless.
Yeah.
And, it's like, whoa, and that's right. It's like, who's running the economy? Nobody's running the economy. Why does gas price go up? Nobody knows. They have all these experts in it. Why is gas price going up? And they go, oh, it's because of this, this conflict or this event or whatever, maybe, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's really weird, and it's something that I'm trying to research and understand. I don't know if there's any studies on this, but I used to have really bad anxiety, and something that you talk about in your audio course on conspiracies and conspiracy theories is what you were just mentioning, that lack of control, right? And that's where a lot of my anxiety came from. I was like, this is chaos, and no matter how much I try to plan, there's no guarantee that I'll get the outcomes. And I noticed that with conspiracy theorists, like for some reason, it's easier to think that the election was rigged rather than, your guy just lost, right? It's easier to think that, COVID is this man-made biological warfare, even if we don't have the proper evidence for that. And it's really interesting how we want that control. But for me personally, it's actually helped my anxiety by learning about this stuff, by educating myself and asking the proper questions. And yeah, I wish there was I don't know. I think some therapies like, CBT and stuff like that, they help you start going through those, and I know Jonathan Haidt talks about that. Jonathan Haidt and Greg in The Coddling of the American Mind, they relate it to CBT and just developing better thinking processes.
Yeah, in a way, we need CBT for just rationality and just kind of in general dealing with all these kinds of claims. Yeah, it's interesting. Your life as you describe it. Recovering alcoholic, I think you said, and then
and addict. Yep, I did everything.
Yeah. So, to what do you attribute you pulling yourself out of that? I deal with the free will issue a lot. So to me, that's an example of volition. These are not determining variables, say the addictive nature of drugs or alcohol or whatever. They're influencing, but you still have some control.
Yeah, that's something I tried to figure out. I worked at a treatment center for a little over 3 years with literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients. It was a pretty big facility here, and I was always trying to analyze what separates the people who recover and the people who don't. And then that gets that gets into a whole conversation about
what is the answer?
It's something I'm still working on. Because, for example, for me, I hit a certain rock bottom. Like I mentioned, I'm from Las Vegas. Right now, I turned 9 years sober this Wednesday. My mom told me 9 years ago, you're either getting sober or you're going to be homeless in Las Vegas. And that was my rock bottom. I was like, I don't want to be in the heat in Las Vegas. That was it. But for some people, they can lose their family, their job, their whatever, and that doesn't do it for them. So there's no formula. And it goes back to that whole chaos thing. Like, we don't know. We don't have a formula for this thing. And that's one of the most difficult parts about addiction, itself. But, like I said at the very beginning of this, the reason why I love learning about skepticism and critical thinking and questioning my belief, because it saved my life. I was 27 years old when I got sober. I thought I knew everything. And one day somebody like just knocked it into my head. They're like, hey, Chris, maybe you don't know everything. And I was like, holy shit, you're right. And ever since then, I look at things differently. And I'm like, maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know the right way to do this. Maybe I'm not doing this the best way possible. Maybe someone else. So I try to gather as much information as possible from people like yourself or other people who are smart in their specific area. Then I take that data and I try to assess it. No matter what it is, whether it's getting a job, whether it's going grocery shopping, whether it's my new diet that I'm trying, I try to take in as much information and then just kind of look at it. So yeah. So I don't know about the free will aspect of it, but I'm currently reading Just
Desserts. Even oh, interesting. Yes. Well, so even the addictive nature of alcohol and drugs is a very complicated one to argue. I've read a fair amount about that. My father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. One of his two brothers was an alcoholic. One of my two half sisters, an alcoholic, whatever. But I'm not. I mean, it doesn't really matter how much I drink. I don't have. It doesn't lead to more drinking. And actually, I have kind of an upper limit where I don't feel good, and so on. And I always wonder, what it is about my genetics, my physiology. So I read about it. And could be this, could be that. And but you get, oh well, people hit rock bottom, then they do this. Well, you just gave examples where that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Take someone like Darryl Strawberry, that with cocaine back in the night. Here's the greatest baseball player of his era. Gave it all up, lost everything, his job, his family, everything, for cocaine. And it's like, well, apparently, losing everything or having all that, all that, even more to lose than the average person, still doesn't matter. And yeah, it's other people, so can't seem to kick it ever. Yeah, you made it. You made it 9 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you have it? What happened? What would happen if you had a drink tonight? You just popped a beer and sat down and watched a game. Maybe had 2 beers. What would happen?
So I know you're familiar. Well, not even familiar. You're buds with Joe Rogan and stuff, and he does. And I recently talked with Brian Earp, and he's into the therapeutic uses of like psilocybin and things like that. Oh, right. So I think about it a lot. And so here in Nevada, we legalize weed. I'm very pro drugs decriminalization. That's just how I am. Yeah. But this is something that I think about, because just my personal story is I started with alcohol, then I got into prescription opioids, which is, killing thousands of people every year. But during different stints of sobriety, I started with things like marijuana. I'm like, oh, I could do this, but it led me right back to the hard stuff. Right. So personally for me, like what would happen, I don't know, but I would be lying. I live in Las Vegas, right? Like I'm surrounded by drugs and alcohol and prostitutes and everything, right? But when I think about drinking or using, I'm like, well, why, right? Like I used to do it for insecurities and social anxiety, but you and I just met. I'm having a conversation with you, so I don't have those reasons anymore. But it's something I do think about, because they're doing tests for like, using magic mushrooms for like PTSD, and think about how many veterans are committing suicide and all that stuff. So what would happen to me? I don't know. And to go back to like your point, or what you were asking earlier. Yeah, I read a ton about addiction and the science and the latest studies, and the genetics component. It's weird. Like my mom, she was an alcoholic until I was 20, right? My sister doesn't have a problem, but I do. And then you get into the whole conversation about epigenetics, right? There's people who experience trauma later in life. They never had an issue. All of a sudden something traumatic happens, and now they can't control their drinking, or they turn to drugs. Right. And it's very complicated. And I think that's, one of the reasons I try to keep up with the science, and maybe starting down that path was why I kind of see this gray area, because even there, we don't know. If we did know, maybe we could stop the opioid epidemic. You know what I mean? But we don't know if it's nature or nurture or the combination, and we're still trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken some opioids. I mean, I just had a total hip replacement last week, so I have some now. Yeah. I'm sitting here on them right now, and it feels good. But I can stop. I know, because I've had a couple of major surgeries where I've had the hydrocodone, the version I had, but they're all the same. And I just stopped. It's no problem. And I think, well, lucky me. Some of it, I think there is a kind of a law of large numbers here. There's so many, like, I don't know, 100 million people or something take, some version of opioids for pain. Maybe it's not 100 million, but it's a lot. It's a huge number. So even if the effects is only like 0.01%, that's enough to fill the evening news of like yet another person died of an overdose, that kind of thing. And this, I do wonder to what extent, I haven't looked at this carefully, but to what extent a lot of this is kind of hyped by the fact that so many people take these drugs, even if the effect is small, that's enough to fill the evening news with horror stories.
Yeah, it's weird. Lately, I've been thinking about just how we move in and out of different like bubbles, right? Like when I'm working in a treatment center, all I'm surrounded by is addiction, and just in 3 years, I have over 80 people die from overdoses, right? Well, since I haven't worked at the treatment center, I've heard of maybe like one person who's died of an overdose. So it depends on where we are and what we're looking at and all that. And yeah, that's something I think about, because now that I'm outside of it, I'm like, is it as big of a problem, or am I now minimizing it because I'm not seeing it on a daily basis? And that's one of the weird, like when we're just going into like, where we donate our time to, and the organizations we want to support and advocate for, that's kind of how I take that stuff into consideration. But yeah, it's interesting. But like you just mentioned a hip replacement, like me, if for some reason I have to have like an invasive surgery, I've already map that out for how I'm going to treat that pain. If it is with opioids, I have my girlfriend who will give me those medications, or, whatever it is, just to be on the safe side. But yeah, it's very difficult to really say what's right for who, because I've seen so many different scenarios. It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you one last question, just that I've been wanting to ask a lot of people before I let you go, and it's about Stanley Milgram. All right. So
All right.
okay, so I was right before we chatted. I went back through your the notes I took on your conspiracy course, and you talk about the Stanley Milgram obedience to authority experiments, where they do the shock experiment. I read this book called like Behind the Shock Machine, and it points out all the flaws, right? Like if you're a skeptic, if you're a Stuart Ritchie looking at Milgram's experiments, oh well, it was all men, or oh it was this, and they didn't report on that and stuff. But here's my issue when I see certain people, criticize certain experiments. Like when I learned about the obedience to authority experiments, I'm like, yeah, like that explains why so many people if you look at the housing market crash, right? It's a lot of people trying to keep their jobs and make money, so they obey the higher ups, or when you see any kind of scandal so I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. People obey authority, but there's a lot of controversy around it. Like, what are your thoughts around that experiment? Could have been done better, or?
Well, I thought it was pretty well done, actually. And I would not put it in one of Stuart Ritchie's categories of non-replicable or falsified psych experiments. I wouldn't. And also same thing with Phil Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, which was never actually an experiment, more of a demonstration. I think that's been overly hyped as being debunked. It's not, in my opinion, it's not debunked. But Milgram, I have a whole section on Milgram in that shock experiments in The Moral Arc. There's actually a pretty rich literature of debates over the last many decades of what exactly was going on there. So, obedience to authority is one thing, but there's also kind of social proof, or, kind of a, social pressure of the situation. And that, that was varied by, who, the proximity of the shocked person, the so-called learner. If they're in the room with the person, they disobey much more than if the person is anonymous. So that's not obedience, that's something else. If you have another person in the room who disobeys the authority, who says, no, I'm not doing this, then the real subject is more likely to say, well, I'm not doing it either. So there you get kind of almost a social contagion of what's called social proof, or conformity to disobey authority. So there's multiple factors going on there. Also, kind of the reinforcement of the authority. What kind of authority? There's nothing wrong with obeying authorities. That's actually a good thing most of the time. So is conformity. So I write about this. I did a whole Dateline NBC 2-hour special with Chris Hansen on classic psych experiments, one of which was like smoke in the room. So we had a bunch of people in a room filling out a form for this Dateline this NBC show called What a Pain. And so these were people that wanted to be on the show, right? And so our authority comes in there and say, well, I work for NBC, and you're going to fill out this form. And then we started pumping in smoke into the room, just theater smoke under the door. And now everybody in the room, except for one person, they just work for us, right? So we told them, just ignore the smoke and keep filling out the form. Okay. So you see our guy going, well, fuck it. All right, I'll just keep filling out my form, right? So, but of course he's looking for evidence. Like, should I be worried? Well, if it was really a fire in the next room, people wouldn't just be sitting there. They'd go, hey, let's get going. Let's do something, right? So we do look to others for good reason, including authorities, right? And, so, again, Milgram's authority is a Yale University scientist. Well, one would hope that people respect Yale University scientists. And same thing in our we did a remake of the Milgram thing. We built a box with the toggle switches and the whole thing. And here we have a director from NBC saying, okay, we're doing this little demonstration having to do with this new show we're doing called What a Pain. And it's just it's a little bit like Joe Rogan's show. What was that show he started
Fear
off
Factor?
on? Fear Factor. It's a little bit
Yeah.
like a Fear Factor, right? Okay, I'll do it. And it's like, so what are they doing when they're saying, okay, I'll do it? And they flip the switches. And you could see for most of them, they weren't happy about it. They were like, oh, geez, God, are you sure this is okay? It's all right. All right.
Yeah.
So they're thinking, come on, I'm in NBC. What are the chances I'm actually going to kill somebody and their lawyers are going to let me do this, right? So those are the legitimate criticisms. I mean, Milgram had men and women. There was no difference. They both went, 2/3 of them went all the way to the full shocks. And, they had working class people, bus drivers, they had lawyers, doctors, they had a whole range of people. There was no difference there. So his protocols were quite rigorous. And so the findings still hold. The interpretation of what's going on in the mind of people, we tend to reify ideas. Oh, that's the obedience going on in his head. Well, that's a word, obedience. What does that really mean? And so there, I think that's debatable. So I would recommend, just go to that section in my book, The Moral Arc on that. It's long because it's a rich literature. And you start reading, you go, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot that you wrote about it in The Moral Arc too. I love that because I love learning about like just moral psychology and philosophy and all that too. We could talk about that in a whole another episode. But so yeah, before I let you go, where for the three people who may not know you, where can they find you? What projects are you working on? You mentioned you're working on a new book. When's it coming out? Can I get an advance copy? What's going on? Where can we find you and what are you working on?
Well, skeptic.com and michaelshermer.com is the two best avenues for that. And, my books are available at Amazon, which is the easiest way to get them in a pandemic. Although bookstores are, mostly carry my books. And also Skeptic magazine is in every bookstore in North America. And it's also available digitally online. You could read it on all the different platforms and tablets and cell phones and so on. And so skeptic.com, that's probably the easiest place to remember.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I follow you on Twitter, so I'll include that. I'm going to include all those links down in the description. So thank you so much
all right, Chris,
for taking some time out of your day.
You're welcome. Thanks. Good conversation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. There is my conversation with Michael Shermer. How great was that? And like he said, everything that he just mentioned, it is all linked down in the description below. Like, go get his books. He talks about so many things, and he helps me look at everything from just different angles, whether it's science or topics around free speech and the exchange of ideas and everything like that. And, it's interesting too, because I don't agree with everything that people say, but I am so curious about their opinions, and I'm willing to have those discussions and everything like that. So I know I know Michael could be a little controversial sometimes, but you can't help but listen to his arguments and his point of view and everything like that, especially because he has so much knowledge and wisdom. So I really hope you check out his books. One of his newest books is Giving the Devil His Due, and that's a lot about allowing freedom of speech, and he makes some compelling arguments around why people should be able to say whatever they want and believe what they want. Like, he had an entire book that I still need to check out where he talks to Holocaust denialists. So even though he knows that they are incorrect and there is no evidence backing their claims, he believes they should be able to discuss their belief, even though it's wrong, because to combat misinformation, we have to be able to discuss it. You know what I mean? But anyways, I could, go on and on and on about how awesome Michael is. So check out his books down below, follow him on all social media. And again, if you like this episode, and if you're not yet, make sure you're following, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating, leave a review, and share with other people on social media. That's what helps get the podcast out there. I have so many conversations, and today's Friday. It's the last week of scientific thinking and healthy conflict. And make sure you stay tuned and follow me on social media, because I think I think I'm going to be doing multiple episodes a week. And one thing that drives me nuts about having a podcast is there's not a comment section, so I don't see your feedback. So a lot of you reach out to me on social media. So if you have any input, any feedback, if you're like, Chris, that's too many episodes, Chris, that's not enough episodes, or whatever. But I have so many more episodes recorded. I have so many authors who are lined up for conversations. So I'm just like, I have plenty of content to just do put a bunch of episodes out there. So anyways, reach out on social media if you have any ideas. And plus, I'm also working on some things we could do on Patreon, which is linked down below if you want to support the podcast. You can also support by getting my books, which are over at therewiredsoul.com. I've written a few books on mental health, as well as my experience getting canceled on YouTube in 2019. And mental health is a huge part of my life. So there is also an affiliate link down below for BetterHelp online therapy. It's a service that I've personally used. I absolutely love it. You work with a licensed therapist from your state, from the comfort of your own home, through calls, text, video chat, whatever it is. So if you're looking for some mental health help, check out BetterHelp. Affiliate link down in the description below. But yeah, anyways, that is all for this episode. Make sure to follow me on social media because a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool conversations are coming up. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. If you're listening on Friday, an amazing weekend. And I will talk to you in the next one.